Hey everybody, it's Jorik. Welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for watching. If you're new, please subscribe because I like to talk about moving to and living in Portugal as well as Europe travel news. If you're returning and you've subscribed, thank you so much. I greatly appreciate it. Today's video, I'm going to talk about something that one subscriber, Paul, happened to ask. He said, what's the work-life balance? What are some of the differences if I'm coming from the US to Portugal or in Europe to working day to day, let's say in an office setting? How do meetings work? How do decisions work? Introductions, things of that nature. So I want to give you an overview from our experience, both my wife and I, from having work relationships here in Portugal. I will say, I don't know that these are Portugal specific. Some of these could apply across Europe, and there are some nuances and differences from what we've experienced in our career in the US compared to what goes on in Europe. So let's start at the top. Introductions. When you say hello to someone, a handshake is prevalent in the United States. A handshake is still prevalent here. I will also say something that would be a little different here, and not just in Portugal, but in Europe, is oftentimes if you know the people, there might be a slight kiss on the cheek, on each cheek, as you're doing your introduction. So that's different than, let's say, the handshake, or sometimes I guess fist bumping is now the new handshake. So from an introduction, there are some nuances between the US and Portugal. When you're in meetings and you're having discussions, whether they be on the phone, so many the last couple of years have been Zoom calls, or if you're in the room with people, my experience in over 30 years in the United States is that those rooms are usually not docile, meaning they can be argumentative discussions, they can be very spirited discussions. More people want their say in how something is going to materialize, whether it be a project or a problem or a solution to something. In Europe and Portugal, in phone calls as well as being in-person meetings, it's more relaxed, not very confrontational, almost the antithesis of confrontation. I would say, generally speaking, there is a lack of wanting to confront, which is not a bad thing. But there is a more laid-back approach to meetings. It's more talking. It's not as much trying to argue or get your point across. That's a little different because in the US, you're used to trying to fight for your time in the meeting or fight for your position, or to try to get your point or your project approved. Here, that isn't the case. It just isn't, and I can speak for meetings throughout Europe. It doesn't work that way, and that leads me to my next point, is that meetings in Europe, or decisions, I'll say, in Europe, are much more consensus-driven than they are individually driven. Where I'm going with that, for those of you that are from the US, and if you spend a lot of time in management or working in companies, oftentimes you'll have a project that you're trying to run up the food chain to try to get approved. It's your project. It's something that you've put your stamp on. If it goes well, you get the credit for it. If it doesn't go well, you get the blame for it. So it's more individualized in the US. Yes, teams get thumbs up and thumbs down on projects and when things go well and things don't. But it's more about the individual recognition when things are right or wrong. So often a boss may say, who did a great job putting this marketing project together? You say, I did. Or you may be in a business meeting and go, okay, whose fault is it that this went this particular direction? Then you have to, that was my fault. In Europe, it's much more a consensus-based, and I will say more collaborative, so that there isn't really any one individual that takes credit for a project going well or being successful. Likewise, there isn't one person taking the fall or taking the blame when things do not go well. So I'll say when things go south and a project doesn't materialize or it's not on budget or on time, there isn't one person singled out for that. It's a team that I'll say gets singled out. So if there's 10 people on the team, everyone takes a share of that responsibility, but no one takes sole responsibility. There's good and bad to that. If you're coming from the US and you're coming here, maybe you want to be the one that is responsible or the one that you're okay taking the blame. That mindset has to change a little bit when you come to Europe and when you're working in Portugal for a business. Even if it's an international business that has, let's say, US roots, if they have facilities here in Europe, the mindset is a little bit different. It's more European, so it's more of a whole approach versus an individual approach when it comes to that. That can bug people because sometimes when you're, I'll say, in sales and marketing, often from the US, your incentives are individually based. If you get a certain amount of sales, if you bring a certain amount of clients in, if you retain a certain amount of book of business, that means something to you individually. And there may be some team or company goals associated with that too. Here, there are some individual goals, not necessarily tied to financial as much. Much of it is business, the company, how the company does as a whole, and how you've contributed to the whole. So it's a more of a holistic approach. I'll use a medicine term, a holistic approach versus an individual approach when you're doing, when you're thinking about things like your salary and your career improvement, things of that nature. If you're here, I would think about how that works within the company structure, or if you need to go work at a different company to get what you want. In the US, I think the mindset, in my mindset, was certainly, how do I get higher on the food chain? How do I rise the corporate ladder to get to where I need to be? So there's a couple of different approaches there. There are some nuances. I would say that something that is unique to Europe and really Portugal, people here take their lunch seriously. In the US, it was not uncommon for much of my career, I'll say when I got into management specifically, that lunches were at my desk. They were fleeting. If I had a lunch outside the office or workspace, that was often filled with meetings or conversations or issues, problem solving, sometimes problem creating. That's where that lunchtime was eaten up. There wasn't a lot of time or break in the day. You got to work, you worked all day, then you went home afterwards. Here, there is a concerted effort to make sure that there's a break in the day. People go have lunch, and it's not like if you have a half-hour lunch, you got to be back in 30 minutes. You can be back in 45 minutes, and that's not a problem. If you have an hour lunch and you come back in an hour and a half, there's no clock watcher at the front door, going, hey, it's you've been gone for 90 minutes. You're supposed to be here, after 60. That mindset's a much more relaxed mindset, I will say. Another thing along with lunches that is the way things, I will say, used to be in the US, for better or for worse. They're not now, but they're still common here in Europe and in Portugal. If you're out having lunch, it's not uncommon to have a glass of wine or a beer with that lunch. That's not frowned upon. In the US, in most businesses, that would be a no-no. The 2 martini lunch from the 50s and 60s is now gone in many cases, not all, but many. Here in Europe and in Portugal, if you're going out and you're having lunch, wine is a way of life here in Portugal. Having a glass of wine or having a glass of beer while you're having your lunch is just part of the culture. So it's part of, if you're into that, it's no big deal. The last thing I want to talk about and touch on as far as a difference in the US, vacation time, I'll say when you're not working, when you're at home, so from, let's say, at night dinner time through the next morning, that in the US, if you have a mobile phone or you have an email, oftentimes you're working till later hours, you're still taking work home and then working on it. On weekends, you're still communicating via text. When you're on vacation, sometimes there's still the urge. Either you feel that the company is forcing you, or you feel guilty by not providing information while you're on a trip. You could be overseas someplace and you still feel the need to check in or respond to emails or give guidance to something. In Europe and in Portugal, when you're on vacation, you're on vacation. There is no expectation that you're going to be checking email. You're going to be looking at anything that comes through. And along with that, you're also not going to get people that will do the, I know you're on vacation, but could you just respond to this text? Or calling you, I know you're on vacation, or sorry to bother you, but we need this information. That's rare. I won't say it never happens, but it's extremely rare for any company in Europe to interfere with your time when you're not working, as well as your holiday or your vacation time. It's really your own, and it gives you a true break from the rat race and work. In the US, I think many of us for decades have been tethered, and now with phones and texts and emails, you still feel that you can never really disconnect from the company, and oftentimes the company makes it difficult because they are calling you and texting you and emailing you while you're on vacation. So that is a big difference that I see, and one of the biggest differences. It's a much more relaxed business climate in Europe and in Portugal. So those are the main differences. Paul, I hope you found this video to be useful. For those of you that are looking to move to Portugal or work here, whether you're a digital nomad, whether you have a job here, you're going to set up a business, I want to make sure that you have kind of the nuances and the ins and outs on how things are different from the US culture, business culture, to the Portuguese and Europe business culture. As always, thank you so much for watching, and enjoy your travels.